The big news of the day, of the month, of the year is that President Trump has been confirmed to have COVID. He tweeted this news out last night. He tweeted out that he and the First Lady have both been tested positive for COVID. He tweeted tonight, Flotus and I tested positive for COVID-19. We'll begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. And, naturally, all the same people on Twitter with the blue check marks, who you would expect, have been just about as nasty as you would expect. Some people have not been. Some people have been pretty classy about it. We'll get to that in a second. But the White House doctor did release a note on this. The White House doctor acknowledging that the president has come down with COVID. Here is the letter. It says, I release the following information with the permission of President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump. This evening, I received confirmation that both President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump have tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 virus. The President and First Lady are both well at this time. They plan to remain at home within the White House during their convalescence. The White House medical team and I will maintain a vigilant watch. I appreciate the support provided by some of our country's greatest medical professions and institutions. Rest assured, I expect the President to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering. I will keep you updated on any future developments. Now, obviously, we don't know the direction that COVID-19 is going to take. The President is 74 years old. He is overweight, which is a complicating factor. It is a pre-existing condition. It is an underlying condition that can exacerbate the effects of COVID-19. So far, it has been reported that the President of the United States has a mild case, or at least his symptoms are mild. We'll see how this plays forward. Honestly, I think from a political point of view, obviously politics comes second. So our prayers go out to the Trump family, just as they go out to any family that is suffering with COVID-19, which can, in fact, be a very serious disease. Politically speaking, this throws a wrench into a lot of what's going on because we have a debate that is scheduled for about 2 weeks from now, presumably if the president goes through the process and then he quarantines for 14 days, he will get out, I believe, literally the day of the debate to do that debate. So it throws a wrench into that. It obviously throws a wrench into his campaign schedule. He's not going to be going out and doing public events for quite a while because he's supposed to, according to the CDC, quarantine for 10 to 14 days. We have to see, of course, the vector that the disease is going to take, which direction the disease is going to take. Here, the political fallout here is pretty obvious for Trump. And the political fallout, as we'll see, is largely surrounding the severity of the disease. If Trump recovers from the disease quickly, if it turns out that this virus is something that doesn't affect him really badly, and that in 4 or 5 days, he's basically back to normal, he has a mild case, then he's going to be able to go out and he's going to say, listen, I know that this thing definitely affects some people truly terribly, and we have to protect those people. We have to make sure they get all the care that they could possibly need. But the truth is that the vast majority of cases tend to be rather mild. And that is true. I mean, statistically, it is true that the vast majority of these cases tend to be rather mild. Virtually everyone below the age of 50 who gets this thing recovers of it. The death rates on this thing are extraordinarily striated by age. If you're under the age of 20, then your likelihood of dying from COVID-19 is something like 2 in 10,000. If you're above the age of 70, then your chances of dying of this thing are something like 5%, which is a lot higher, obviously. And Trump is in that latter cohort. So if he recovers quickly and if he recovers easily, he's going to be able to say with a certain amount of credibility that it is important to recognize that this disease does not affect everybody equivalently, that many of these cases are mild, and it's important to keep that in mind when we are talking about recovery and the campaign probably moves on. Obviously, if it's much more severe, then we don't just have a political issue on our hands, we have like an actual human life issue on our hands. Now, it turns out a lot of people have been infected inside the White House. Apparently, this thing started with Hope Hicks, is the current supposition. Hope Hicks, of course, is a top aide to the President of the United States. Other people who have tested positive at this point include Ronna McDaniel. She's a guest a little bit earlier on the show this week. Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the RNC, according to the New York Times, has tested positive for COVID and is experiencing mild symptoms, according to several people briefed on the situation. Ms. McDaniel is the latest person in frequent contact with Trump to test positive for the virus. Apparently, she received her diagnosis on Wednesday, and after a crowded donor event in March at Mar-a-Lago, the president's private club in Florida, Ms. McDaniel felt ill, but she tested negative way back then. Of course, Trump is not the first world leader to be infected. Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain had a very serious case. He was actually hospitalized. President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil tested positive as well. Bolsonaro's case was much milder than Johnson's case. Both of those men are significantly younger than Trump. He is older and probably at higher risk just on a basic medical level than either of those people. It is true that a lot of people today are pointing out, Trump's personal behavior, and we'll get into that in just a second. And they're pointing out that earlier this week, he seemed lethargic and that, he maybe should have taken precautions at that point. Why wasn't he tested at that point? Mike Pence, for what it's worth, Mike Pence and the second lady, Karen Pence, have both tested negative for the virus at this point. And it is also true that a lot of people get this thing, and a lot of people recover from this thing, and a lot of people get it under different circumstances. For example, Justin Trudeau's wife had this thing. And so there's this sort of belief out there, this talismanic belief that if you do all of the right things, or if you, what's even more bizarre, if you say all of the right things, that you're immune from the disease. Right? One of the things that's very frustrating to people who watch this in an attempt to be objective in any real way about this is that there are certain things you can do to minimize the chances that you're going to get it. There's no guarantee you're not going to get it because we're all living life. You're going to run into contact with people. N95 masks may provide you a significant barrier. They may provide you real protection, but cloth masks don't provide you the same protection. The original idea of cloth masks was that mainly you're preventing other people from getting it, not that it prevents you from getting it. There was a point a month ago where Anthony Fauci was suggesting this thing is transmissible via the eyes. So he was suggesting that people actually wear goggles if they could. So there's no guarantee that you're not going to get it. There are things you can do to minimize it, and we'll talk about whether Trump has done those things. But there's this belief on the left, as we'll see, that even more than any of that, if you virtue signal about the virus, this acts as some sort of protection. So Trump's great sin here was not even his personal behavior. It was the stuff that Trump said. If Trump had just said, I'm super serious about it over and over and over, it would have been fine. Or if Trump presumably had protested at like a Black Lives Matter rally, he wouldn't have gotten it. Or if he did get it, then it would have been worth it because he would have been protesting racism. One of the big problems with this entire debacle since March is that where we should have been following the science and being measured in our language about what works and what doesn't, where we should have pointed out that risk factors vary by age, where we should have pointed out that certain types of masks are better than other types of masks. And we should have stopped this sort of virtue signaling about how if you wear a mask, but it's below your nose, that's better than not wearing a mask at all or something. Or that if you wear a neck gaiter, the CDC has said, by the way, a neck gaiter is actually worse than nothing. A neck gaiter actually helps aerosolize your spit. Like if you sneeze into a neck gaiter, it actually blows it through the thing like a sieve, and then it just kind of makes it go further. It actually aerosols it wider. Okay, so my big problem here is twofold. One, I think there's some legit criticisms to be made of how Trump has personally, in terms of his attitude and what he's conveyed to other people and his personal behavior, has handled COVID. I also think that the media have set up these bizarre standards where you're immune to the disease if you are protesting for racial justice, where if you run around and virtue signal about wearing a mask 100 feet from other people, this somehow makes you immune to the disease when it really has nothing to do with any of that. There's this sort of talismanic worship of particular modes of discussing this disease, that if you take it super seriously, then at least you're protected from the backlash or the mockery if you do get it. And again, that is completely separated from the public policy discussion. It's completely separated from a rational scientific discussion of these issues. So for example, I've said on the show many times that if you're my age, if you're 36 and you're, thank God, healthy, I'm 36 and I'm healthy, I don't have any underlying conditions. If I get this thing, I'm not particularly afraid of getting this thing because I'm 36 and I have no underlying conditions. And then I said, it is also possible that I could die of this thing if I get it, because it is possible that anybody could die of this thing if they get it, although the chances are extremely unlikely. Now, because I've said the former part, which is that statistically speaking, I'm extremely unlikely to die of this disease, if God forbid something were to happen to me, then the media would jump on that and suggest that I was taking it lightly, even though I specifically say at the end of that sentence that it could happen to me. It's just very unlikely that it's going to happen to me. People do not seem to understand how statistics work in any real way. So if you say things like Trump has said before, that not very many people are dying of this thing relative to the percentage of the population at this point, depending on age, that may be statistically true. It can also be insensitive. But people will use that as an example of Trump not taking the thing seriously, as opposed to, is what he is saying actually true? Right? He said earlier that if you're young and you get it, you really are not at high risk. That happens to be a true statement. That's not an example of him not taking it seriously. And you saying that you are at high risk if you're 5, as opposed to if you're 80, is actually being statistically irresponsible with the information, but morally irresponsible. Right? This is sort of the divide that has happened, is that if you discuss this thing in a statistically responsible way, then you are charged with being morally irresponsible. It's the AOC version of reality. And if you say things that are statistically irresponsible, if you say, well, yes, it's true that older people get it, but if you're young, you definitely could die of it without any sort of examination of the base rates or of the actual death rates, the infection fatality rates, then you are considered good. And so if something happens to you, then we can say, well, at least he took it seriously, right? That was a good person. It's become a moral battle as much as it has been a scientific battle. Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional leftist tier? Don't ask me why. That's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, hit the like button.